And welcome. Today I'm going to walk you guys through exactly what I do during my editing process from start to finish. Obviously this may change up a little bit depending on the type of session or if I was in the studio, but in general this is the steps I take when editing an outdoor session. So let's get started, and I apologize in advance if you guys hear my little one in the background. When he hears me talking and recording things, he likes to come talk to me. So yeah, let's get started. So first I am in Lightroom. I already have all of my images imported in, and I just picked this one to go ahead and demonstrate on. So what I do first is I always click auto just to kind of give me a good base layer. I tend to edit a little bit brighter, so I always pull up my exposure a little bit. I pull up my contrast because I always like to have my blacks be black. So I really like the contrast, and it kind of helps the colors pop too. So I always up my contrast and I decrease the blacks. And you'll notice that I kind of do everything a little bit at a time, and I'll come back and I really keep adjusting and playing around with it until I like the final result. So that is a good starting point there just for an overall base. I want to up this clarity just a little bit, and again that helps with the blacks while giving it a little bit of sharpness. I always keep my vibrancy at 15, and I don't really touch the saturation that much. So next is our HSL, and really on here all I typically do is mess with the greens. I like to bring down my greens from the grass so that they look more natural. If I have to, sometimes I will, make them lighter or darker, but I like the way this looks right here, so I'm just going to leave the luminance. And from there, I always try to close these just so I'm not constantly scrolling. I am going to go to the color grading. If you have an older version of Lightroom, this will say split toning, but it does the same thing. They just changed the way it looks for the newer version. And I like to click on the highlights. I come down here to hue. I click that color to get started. Normally that does a pretty good job at what I need. Occasionally I'll make it a little bit warmer or lighter, but for the most part I just leave it right where it is, and then I come back up to my white balance and I will bump it up from here if needed, and that looks pretty good. So my next step would be to add a gradial filter just over their faces, and I use this just to make them pop a little bit. So I would come down here to dodge, lighten it a little bit, bring up my shadows and my sharpness. If I have to, I'll bring up the contrast just a tad. Same with the clarity again, because like I said, I really like the blacks to stay black so that it gives a good contrast with their skin tones and all of that good stuff. So that looks pretty good. And again, I'm moving through this kind of fast for the sake of this video. Normally I would take some more time and, really fine tune things. So the next step, I like to zoom in on their faces. And since hers are the only eyes showing, I'm going to take my brush tool here, and they have this iris enhance. Sometimes I use that, but for the most part I just like to dodge the eyes just to give them a little pop. I don't want anything crazy that makes them look, out of the ordinary. Like I said, the dodge automatically puts your exposure up, so I just leave it there, sharpen a little bit, maybe even bring up the whites a little bit, but for the most part that's pretty good. They just pop a little bit extra but yet still look natural. So this for the most part looks pretty good. Like I said, I would maybe fine tune some little things, but for the most part I like the way this looks. I might brighten it up just a tad. Maybe bring down my shadows just a tad and warm it up some. But yeah, for the most part, I like the way that looks. So I'm just going to leave it at that, again, for the sake of this video. So now I'm going to right click and I am going to edit in and then Adobe Photoshop and give it a second to load. Sometimes mine won't open Photoshop on its own, so if that happens to you, just go in and manually open Photoshop and then give it a minute and your image should appear. So in here, I already have opened 2 light flares that I know I'm going to be using. I've been using them with this entire gallery, so I know I'm going to be using them. But you can open any types of light flare, lens flare, anything else that you want to add into the images, and then you don't have to do that either. Maybe you don't quite know how to do that yet, or it's not how you edit. No big deal. That's just my preference of what I do. So first things first is I see she has this band-aid here. So I'm going to zoom in on this and I am going to grab my lasso tool and I am going to select her band-aid and then I am going to hit Shift Delete and then make sure content aware 100% is selected. Click OK, and that should do a good job at removing that band-aid. We have a little bit here. You could try to clone that back in, but I think I'm just going to, for the sake of how small that is and for the sake of this video, I am just going to crop that in just a hair. And there we go. That should be good right there. And also, I don't know how to get these little learn things to go away, so I apologize that they're appearing. I don't know how to get them to not show up, but yeah. So there's that. So next step, I am going to duplicate my background, and I just leave it named background copy. That way I know what it is. And then your copied layer, right click, and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. And this might just take a second to do. This is just going to give us some more options and allow us to go back and edit some things later. So now that you see this little mark here, that means it's done and it's now a smart object. So from here, I am going to go to my selection tool and then I am going to click select subject. This doesn't always do a perfect job, but it normally does a good enough job for what I'm doing, and I can always go in and clean it up later. So at this point, it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. You just want to make sure that it's a generalized grabbing of your subject. So I am going to grab the plus is to add to the selection, the minus is to take away. I'm going to grab the plus and I'm going to come down here and I want to add that little spot in and just kind of go around the edges. You can zoom in, but like I said, we're going to brush back in all these little hairs later. So for the most part, this looks pretty good. All of the skin and the dress lines are clean, and we will go in and fix the hair later, so don't worry about hairlines and stuff. And then you also want to make sure if there's any gaps between your subjects like this one here that you have those selected out as well, this edit is going to be for the background and that's part of the background, so you want to make sure to include that. So now that we have our subject selected, we are going to go to select and we want to inverse our selection. So this is going to allow us to only edit the background, and any edits we make to the background will not be transferred onto our subject. So from here, I am going to go to filter, blur gallery, and then I want to go to tilt shift. This is going to help create our depth of field. So now for this image, everything is behind them. So if their feet or if they were sitting down, if their feet were showing or if they were sitting down in this image, I would put this middle point wherever their butt is, where they're sitting, or at their feet. So the ground that is already in focus is where you want this point to be. But because they're not sitting and I don't see their feet, the entire background should be blurry. So I'm gonna move this down a little bit. I'm not gonna completely take it off of the page, but we are going to, so what we're going to do is, with the tilt shift, your blurriness is going to fade. So anything between these two solid lines right here is going to be in focus still. So you can like make these as big or as little as you want, but anything between these solid lines will remain in focus as it was in camera. And then from here to this dashed line, it's going to gradually get blurred more. So I'm going to move this up because these bushes right here weren't that far from us. Same with these trees and plants and whatnot. They were not that far from us. So you just want it to be a little bit blurry, whereas this back here was really far. So you want that to be more blurry. So we're going to leave those kind of like that, and you can play around with these. Maybe I should have done this with a video or with a picture that had some of the background in focus. I can maybe show you one of those quick too. But for the sake of this, we'll just keep it like that. And then up here are your options. So you can make it as blurry as you want. And so I don't know why it does this either. But right now it shows that their faces are blurred. But once we hit OK and save it, I promise they will not be blurred as long as you did the inverse selection in our previous steps. So don't worry that they're blurry right now. So from here, you can blur it as much or as little as you want. I like to keep it somewhat realistic. The distortion is just, all these options are really just how you prefer and how you want your work to look. If you have lighting in the background, like if you were doing Christmas sessions and you have like strung lights, here is where you can like play with the bouquet. And how you want that to look. There's a ton of options. And then I think it's important to add green, even if it's just a little bit, because that's what's going to give it the most realistic look. Just naturally we don't get these creamy blur. You always have a little bit of green. So I like to add just a little bit into it. And we're going to go ahead and click OK. And it might take a second to load because you are doing a lot of edits. And then, so here you can see they are back to being in focus. The background looks pretty good. It's pretty gradual. And I actually really like that. If you, for some reason, say didn't like it, you can come here to Gallery Blur, double click, and it'll bring you back. And you can go back and make any other adjustments. I might leave that down just a little bit and then go ahead and click OK again, and then you can see what it will look like. I don't want to hit cancel. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it there. Now we want to, like I said, we're going to come in and it kind of looks like there's a little halo around them, and we also want to add some of those flyaways back in the hair, because that again is going to add that realistic look to it. So we are going to go and make sure your background copy is selected, and you're going to come down to this little tool here, and we are going to create a mask layer. So click on that, and you want this box here to be white. And so from there, you're going to come over and you're going to grab your brush tool, and then you want to come down and make sure the color that you have selected is black. I didn't mean to click on that. Is black. And then I always put my opacity kind of low for this, because you're essentially going to be erasing the blur that you just put in it. So you don't want to do too much, or else you're going to get like a line around their head. So I leave the opacity like 30-ish, but I bump the flow down to like 15. And then I'm actually going to make my brush a little bit smaller too, and I'm going to zoom in. You want to paint this in close to your subject. You don't want to get too far out here, so notice I only have a little bit of it going into my background, and just keep brushing away and you'll start to see those flyaways come back in. And okay, I'm going to actually up my flow and opacity just to speed it up for this video, but like I said, I highly recommend taking it easy, taking your time to really blend this in so that it looks realistic and you get a natural flow. Yeah, so like I said, you can see that halo is starting to go away. And let me zoom in a little bit more over here so you can really see these hairs coming back. See how all of those are starting to appear, and that's just gonna give it a natural look, because realistically we all have flyaways, and realistically if you have a good sharp lens, then you are going to see those in your pictures. So you want them to be there. I mean, now if you had one that was, say it was windy and it was really crazy, you could leave those ones out, this is another good feature for that, getting rid of any of those flyaways. And I am going to come in the neck because we have a little bit of a halo in there. And then just go around. You normally only get those halos in the hairlines, but everything else looks pretty good. So there is that, and you can see how it just kind of looks a little bit more cohesive, I guess. And here you can see, so that was the before we added that blur, and now give it a second and you can see after we added the blur, it's not too much of a difference, but it definitely gives it that more creamy background, and I just really like the way that it looks. You can also I'm gonna turn off the layer mask really quick, and you can see these edges here. All right, now I'm gonna turn it back on and watch just the difference and how it just makes it look more seamless. So watch when I turn it back on. And now you're back to, you don't have that halo and all those little hairs are back there. So now that we did that, I'm going to go ahead and add in my light flares. You just click, hold, and drag onto these, and be careful whenever you're doing this. I'm going to delete that quick. When you're doing this, you want to be careful and look at where your light is coming from. So the light is coming from behind them. The sun sets like right in here at this park we were at, and so all of the light is going to be behind them. So I don't want to add like a lens, not a lens flare, a sun flare like over here. You want your sun flares to look realistic. So for this, I am going to actually flip the image horizontally because that sun is more to the left side in this picture. I'm gonna put that here, and I'm gonna hit Command T. I'm on a Mac. This is the free transform tool. I don't know what the commands would be, or the short keys would be for Windows. I'm going to kind of turn this a little bit because, again, I want to mimic where that actual sun would be. I'm going to make this bigger so it covers the entire image. Maybe move this over that way just a little bit. Click OK. And then my blending options, I'm going to come down to screen. And you see how it just gives us a really soft light. And again, just adds to that little dreamy kind of like boho effect that we all like to get from golden hour. And then from here, I'm going to add another layer mask. So this little button down here again. just like before, make sure this is white, make sure you're on the black color, select your brush. I'm gonna make my brush a little bit bigger and then go in and just do over their faces if you want. This is going to help them stand out more and bring back some of that contrast so they don't look hazy and faded out. Like, depending on your session and the way you're editing, you may like that look. Or if you had a really harsh natural sun, you get that anyway, so maybe you're trying to mimic that. But I want really sharp images when it comes to their face. And you can see over here where the black is, that's where I'm erasing that sun flare. So this looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna leave it like that. And now I'm going to add my second sun flare. Oops, I always forget to select my grabber tool here. So I'm just clicking, holding, and dragging and placing it in this general area of where I want it to be. I'm going to go to my blending options and go to screen. And so you kind of see it disappeared. We might, because there's a white background there, we might not even need this one, but I like to make it big and play. This is probably one of my favorite sun flares, so I try to incorporate it on a lot of my sessions just because I love it so much. And you can just play around with it. You know, it's not super noticeable, but I do like that it brings some of that light into her hair. Like I said, the light is coming from more over here, so I feel like I should keep it more over this way. Let's try. Let me see, I'm gonna turn the opacity down a little bit. I actually am gonna go back to that last sun flare and do the same thing, turn the opacity down on that one. And then I always do this toggle on and off to see which, if I like something. I do like that. I think I'm gonna bring it up just a little bit. And yeah, I think I'm just gonna leave it like that. So that looks pretty good to me. That would probably be my final image. That is for the most part what I do. And then right click on all of your options, and I always go to flatten image. Now you see all my layers are gone. File, export. I always use the export over the save. I think it just gives you a little bit better quality. So from here, JPEG, you want your quality to be 100%. I do the copyright and contact info. You don't have to. Convert to sRGB, export, and then choose where you're going to save your images. So I'm going to save here. And there you go. You are all set. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for some more tricks and to learn more about how I operate my business behind the scenes.